I'm going to say something that might be controversial. I don't like Androxus' rework. I think that he has worse talent diversity, absolutely no gun diversity, and that it doesn't reward skill. Let me explain. So to start off with, what is the new rework? Well, it's a change to his Cursed Revolver, where basically the old version of Cursed Revolver got implemented into base kit. So the old Cursed Revolver changed the way that his gun worked to make it more accurate, do more damage per shot, and have a slower fire rate. And it also had better range, whereas the old version of the revolver fired fast. It actually did 1444 DPS, which was absolutely crazy, but it had terrible range and really bad inaccuracies. So you could be shooting here, and while the majority of the shots would hit, you might miss maybe one, maybe two, though that was unlikely. And so the old Cursed Revolver did around 1200 DPS up close, so it was actually lower DPS in close quarters, though it did let you 3-shot if you hit a headshot. But while it did have lower DPS in close quarters, at long range, such as this range, it had much better DPS than his base revolver, so it was a bit of a trade-off. And so that talent got moved into base kit, so it now does 550 damage every half second, and so it is just a worse version of old Cursed Revolver. It now does 1100 DPS, so it is straight up worse in close quarters than his old gun was if you were to use something like Godslayer or Defiant Fist, and it's lower DPS than Cursed Revolver, but as you'll see, that doesn't really matter because the new Cursed Revolver just brings that DPS right back up. So what is the new Cursed Revolver? Well, the new Cursed Revolver applies a damage over time effect that lasts for 2 seconds, and it deals damage every 0.15 seconds that basically ramps up the longer it remains on target. So it starts at 10 and increments by 1 up to a maximum of 30. And so we can grab this here, and you can see, yeah, we're starting to burn them, or bleed them to death rather. It doesn't technically count as burning, because it doesn't put a little circle status indicator on the top of your screen like it would if you were standing in Tyrafire. So yeah, it can actually 3-shot enemies without needing a headshot, which is something that the old Cursed Revolver didn't have. So you can do this, this, and this, and it's a 3-shot. Now you might be saying, well hold on, isn't that a slower fire rate? Yeah, it is. But check this out. Since there's delay between shots anyways because of your dashes, you can do this. Just leisurely do dash flicks. They don't even have to be fast, and it's a 3-shot. So if you're actually bad at dash flicks and you do them more slowly than a pro might, then you're actually going to 3-shot your enemies, whereas the pro might need 4 shots, because if you do them fast, bam, 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 yeah, she lives with a sliver of HP, so it actually doesn't reward skill. If you're skillful and you do those flick shots quickly, you're going to need 1 more shot to finish off the target, which is just absolutely crazy. And of course, even if we're not talking 3 shots, well, it makes 4-shotting a lot easier when fall-off starts to take into effect. So at this range, we can 4-shot very easily. However, if we switch to Godslayer, well, would you look at that? It requires 1 extra shot to kill, which means it takes us half a second longer to kill someone with any of his other 2 talents than it does with Cursed Revolver if we're just using the revolver alone. Like, it is super reliable. There's not any like, oh, I need to wait for the bleed between shots. No, it's just like, it's 4 shots. Bing, bang, bam, done. It's just extra damage. And another perk about the damage over time, it's a reveal. You reveal enemies with this for 2 seconds when you hit them. Which means, if you're playing against a Skye or a Strix, well, you have free Illuminate. All you gotta do is hit them once. You might still want to buy Illuminate, but once they get out of your Illuminate range, as long as that DOT is still on them, well, hey, I mean, invisibility, yeah, it's useless in 2022. So, you know, Androxus needed a reveal, I guess, because apparently he wasn't powerful enough. News to me, I guess. But yeah, that's another thing he can do. And so in summary, the new Cursed Revolver is just flat out better than old Cursed Revolver. Because if you actually take a look at the numbers, well, in 1 second, this burn does 75 damage. Meaning that your DPS goes up to 1175 in that first second. Because you get 2 shots off, and then the burn adds that extra 75. It's 1175, which is just 25 shorter than 1200. However, for every second after that, your DPS is straight up higher. So against this Fernando, yeah, now our DPS is better than 1200. And there we go, he's dead. So it's just flat out better in that regard. And then it's also flat out better than old Cursed Revolver because old Cursed Revolver didn't have a reveal. So, you know, there's that. And of course, again, like I said, it lowers the skill requirement because, well, sometimes you can 3 shots without even needing a head-to-head shot. If you're just leisurely, like, dashing around or, you know, jiggle peeking too, that's a thing. Like, oh, I'm going to peek, and then go behind cover, and then peek again, and then peek again, like that. Well, hey, guess what? I just three-shot that Ying, all while mostly being behind cover. Yeah, it's really something, isn't it? But of course, since the base revolver got changed, Cursed Revolver isn't the only talent that's affected. So how does this affect Godslayer? Well, Godslayer is actually in a pretty okay spot as a result of this rework. It's probably the most balanced talent of them all, because, well, it's not nearly as effective as Cursed Revolver, but it's not bad either. It's certainly much better than Defiant Fist. So you can still 4-shot, barely. Like, if that Ying had a little bit more health, or Haven 1, or got a tiny heal, I would need 5 shots, whereas with Cursed Revolver, hey, I might not. So, you know. In close quarters, it's just flat out worse CPS. Like, at this range, I'd be doing more damage with old Godslayer. And also, another thing to consider with Godslayer is that oftentimes with a Godslayer build, you're using this card, Seething Hatred, which reduces the cooldown of reversal by 2.5 seconds at level 5 after hitting an enemy with your weapon. So, usually it takes about 4 shots to get your reversal back, and that is true for the old Godslayer as well as the new Godslayer. So we can do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got my reversal back. But that's slower than old Godslayer, because the fire rate is slower now. It's half a second. So it actually takes you about half a second longer to get a reversal back because of this change. And that's assuming you're killing the target, because with this build, it was optimized to get it done in exactly 4 shots if you're killing someone, so we have Watchful at 1 and Disrupt at 1, and that gets us to just the perfect amount of reset. So, do this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we get a reversal, but that's half a second longer now where I'm not using that reversal, which means I don't have, you know, as much protection, and the whole cycle is just slower now. But of course, Godslayer, you don't have to play it super up close, and if you're playing it from a little bit farther away like this, then yeah, the revolver is actually better. So, you know, having that extra range and having that perfect accuracy is very nice if you're playing like this. But it does have to be noted that, yeah, it does take a little bit longer to get a reversal back. And in close quarters, which, you know, generally you tend to want to be in close quarters if you're trying to hit a projectile like this, because it's much easier. Yeah, the DPS is worse. And again, like I said earlier, his weapon diversity is, well, 0 now. He has the same weapon for every single playstyle, so gone are the days of having the choice of, you know, do I want to play with the fast-firing semi-auto version today, or do I want to play with the slow-firing automatic version today? Nope, that's gone. So now you're forced to play the slow-firing automatic version. So, you know, in terms of customization, that's gone down, and of course I thought Paladins was meant to be about customization, but I guess not. Lex can have 2 different weapons, but Androxus, well, not anymore. And now, let's talk about Defiant Fist. Oh boy. This talent is dead. It sucks this patch so hard. It was already his worst talent last patch simply because of how unreliable it is, because it forces you to get into close quarters to do your damage. However, if you got into close quarters last patch, well, you'd be doing much better than you are this patch, because this patch with this new revolver, your close quarters DPS is significantly worse. Instead of that 1444 like we said earlier, yeah, it's 1100 now. So, literally just 300 worse? That's nuts. And yeah, well, of course the range, again, like with Godslayer, is very helpful if you're at this distance. If you're at this distance, you're not using Defiant Fist, because you're not even close to punching these guys. So at that point, why not just play Cursed Revolver? But yeah, once you get into close quarters here, well, you can still do that combo, but because your fire rate is slower, that combo actually takes more time than it did last patch, because last patch, 3 shots and a punch is all you would need to kill that Ying, but you would get those 3 shots off in roughly a second. Now it takes a second and a half. And also another thing to consider is that Defiant Fist ramps up its damage based on how many shots you hit. And to get the max damage on your punch, you need 7 shots. So if we shoot this Fernando at close quarters 7 times, 6, and reload, and 7, and then punch the Ying, there's 1040 damage. But that took us so much longer than last patch because our fire rate is so much slower. And to get 7 shots out, well, that time really adds up. So it just takes so much longer to get your punch damage now. So, you know, maybe if they reduce the amount of shots you needed to get that max damage, that would be good to compensate for the fire rate. But yeah, in its current state, I mean, that's just straight up slower. And just to prove that it counts the weapon shots and not the weapon damage, we can get at this range where we have fall off, and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then 7, and you'll see the punch still does 1,040 damage. So it's not the damage, the range doesn't help that. It's the amount of shots. So yeah, Defiant Fist just straight up got worse. Yes, the range damage is better, but if you're fighting at this range, you're not using Defiant Fist. And so, literally, why not pick Cursed Revolver? And then once you get in that close quarters, you're just worse than you were last patch. So, yeah, this talent, like, you could fit the amount of people who play this talent into a four-seater, into just a regular car. There's nobody who play this talent. It's either Godslayer or Cursed Revolver, and even still, the vast majority of players pick Cursed Revolver because it's just flat out better. So in summary, Cursed Revolver is just his best talent by a mile. It does pretty much the same amount of damage as it did last patch, and does even more damage if you keep that burn going on a target. It gives you a reveal, which is, you know, that's very helpful, but also, why did Androxus need a reveal? He didn't. But also it lowers the skill requirement, because you can 3-shot without needing a headshot. Old Cursed Revolver required you to hit a headshot, but new Cursed Revolver, well, you can jiggle peek like this, and you can 3-shot. Or, if you're bad at your dash flicks, and thus are slow, well, you, my friend, get to 3-shot. Whereas the person who does their dash flicks quickly, well, they require an extra shot. So, yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Godslayer is alright this patch, honestly. It's probably the talent I have the least complaints about, because for the most part, it's pretty similar. You still need 4 shots to get your reversal back. Of course, it is a little bit slower because of that fire rate, but the range, well, it definitely makes up for it. And so this talent, honestly, I don't really have a problem with it. Like, this is alright. But then Defiant Fist is dead, because up close, your DPS is just flat out worse than it was last patch. And at long range, there's no reason to pick Defiant Fist because it forces you to be up close, whereas Godslayer and Cursed Revolver do not. So this range, I mean, the poke is very helpful, but, you know, you gotta get up close to hit those punches, and if you're in this range, you would want last patch's Revolver. And lastly, because the fire rate is much slower, it takes much, much longer to build up the damage to get yourself a max damage punch. So, yeah, it's so rough. Don't pick Defiant Fist. And so Androxus' talent diversity just got worse. Last patch, Cursed Revolver was still his most popular talent, but at least Defiant Fist was more of an option last patch than it was this patch, and Godslayer was Godslayer. Again, Godslayer is mostly the same this patch, so last patch, you know, you would still pick Godslayer about as much as you would this patch. The range is very helpful, the damage last patch was very helpful. It's a trade-off, but it's still fine. But then also, his weapon diversity is gone. He no longer has 2 distinct weapons. Instead, he only has 1 weapon, which is this slow-firing, automatic, perfectly accurate pistol. So you don't have the choice of the much burstier, but much shorter ranged, and much faster firing, old revolver. That was his base. So what would I do to change this? Because obviously, I shouldn't just sit here and complain and gripe without offering any solutions. So what would I do to fix it? Well, the first option would be to simply revert it to the way he was last patch. Restore the old revolver, which was absolutely fine for Godslayer, and much needed for Defiant Fist, and then simply nerf old Cursed Revolver. So you could make it do 550 damage like it does now. You would still be able to 4-shot like that. You wouldn't really be able to 3-shot anymore, which would actually relieve some frustration for some players. But, of course, headshots would still be helpful, because headshots are just more damage, and so if they get healed, well, it works out. And, yeah, it just wouldn't feel like as much of a mandatory option, because at 600 damage per shot, you know, you were able to 3-shot with a headshot, and it just felt like it was doing really good damage up close, but then also it was by far the superior option at range. And so that would kind of clear up that dynamic a little bit, because up close, the old revolver would feel, you know, better, but then at long range, Cursed Revolver would still be, you know, just the best. However, if they wanted to keep this change and keep this gun for all of his talents, then, well, some changes need to be made to this Cursed Revolver, because it's just straight up his best talent right now. So if you wanted to keep this reveal, then make it reveal without doing any damage over time. Just have the reveal. Would be very helpful for the Androxus player, would be a hard counter to Invis champs, but would not do any extra damage. So it'd be a utility talent instead of being a do more damage talent like his other two talents are. Alternatively, if you don't want the reveal, then simply make it do more damage without having the DOT. Because honestly, that would feel more fun to play against. Because sometimes you're playing against a Cursed Revolver player, and you're behind cover, you think you're safe, you got away from him, and then you just die to the bleed. Because, well, you know, Cursed Revolver. It'd be really nice as well, just for quality of life's sake, if you would have a little circle status effect on the top of your screen, like when you're on fire from Tire Fire, just to let you know that you're burning. Because Strix's Crack Shot does it, and Tire Fire does it, and Sky's Poison Bolts do it, but Androxus' Cursed Revolver doesn't. So I think that would be just nice as a general quality of life change. It wouldn't really affect the balance in any way, it would just feel good as a player. However, instead, something else I think they could do is just do away with the idea of a Revolver talent. Because Cursed Revolver, for as long as I can remember, has been just problematic. Before it, you know, was old Cursed Revolver and did just better damage and had better range, you know, it was a talent that gave him extra headshot damage, and that was problematic. And now it's problematic because it's a talent that, again, just makes him straight up do more damage, but also has a reveal. Like, every time they've tried to make a Revolver talent, it's been his most popular talent and his best talent, and I think it's just, well, as long as there's a Revolver talent, it's just going to be his best. And so what if we gave him a dash talent instead? Like, what if we gave him a talent that separated his Nether Step into 3 distinct charges, which is, well, if you're a veteran player, you'll remember a talent he actually did have, and while it wasn't his best, it would at least make it so that, you know, he has more just options when it comes to his dashes. You don't feel like you have to use all of them back to back to back. And you could maybe even reduce the cooldown of the dash as well, just to make him super mobile. Or you can make it so his dashes do damage when you go through an enemy, like this. So it would encourage you to do your dash flicks through an enemy instead of, you know, just darting around an enemy. And that could be interesting too. And it would be just a third talent that does more damage. You know, there are options that you could do to kind of play around the dash instead of playing around the Revolver. And then at that point, I think you'd have 3 distinct talents. Defiant Fist would still be kind of crap, but, you know, you could buff Defiant Fist. Which, speaking of buffing Defiant Fist, if you're keeping this Revolver, something that needs to happen is making successful hits of your Revolver just stack faster. Maybe buff it up to 20%, so you only need 5 shots instead of 7. Because now that the fire rate is slower, the damage accumulation is slower, and this talent just feels like crap. You can still do that, but it's slower, and if you want to build up a mega 1000 damage punch, it's going to take you much, much longer. So I think that would be a good change just to kind of pump Defiant Fist up if you're going to keep this Revolver. But lastly, I want to throw out just kind of an inventive idea. I don't know if this would be a good idea, or if it would be a really crap idea, but what you could do is, like I said earlier, get rid of Cursed Revolver and replace it with the dash talent. But then, add a passive to Androxus. You know how Octavia has this thing, right? Where you choose your passive before you choose your talent? You could do that, but for his Revolver. So you could have him at the start choose whether he wants the slower firing Revolver that's automatic, pinpoint precise, but does less DPS, or do you want the high DPS, short-ranged, more inaccurate Revolver? And just give him those 2 choices. Because I really like the idea of Androxus having, you know, these 2 different forms of Revolver. Because I think having diversity in this game is a good thing, you know, having 2 choices for your weapon. It's a really cool thing that not a lot of games have. And so, you know, Androxus having this, I think it's really, really cool. And now it's gone this patch. And so, you know, he's just got the one option now. And it would open you up to say, hey, do I want to play Defiant Fist? Yeah, I do want to play Defiant Fist. Let me pick the Revolver that gives me much better close quarters damage. Or I can play Defiant Fist, but let's say I just prefer the, you know, the Cursed Revolver option, you know, the one that fires slower, is more accurate. Well, I have the choice to pick that. And I can just choose which Revolver I want with whatever talent. I think that would be a good idea. It would be definitely a programming challenge, and I don't know how feasible it would be, but it is an inventive solution that maybe would be the best option, or maybe it wouldn't be. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, is just my thoughts on the Androxus rework. Because of course it is one of the spiciest balance changes of this update, and it's one of the most controversial ones as well, because I know some people really like it, and some people are absolutely not a fan of it. So please let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Share your thoughts on this rework. Please keep it respectful, of course, because, well, it is Androxus. I know people can have some strong opinions on him. And yeah, I would just love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of my ideas for changing him, and what do you think of my opinions about this talent? Am I just flat out wrong? Am I right? Am I partially right? Let me know. And also, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure, of course, to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload from me. And also check out my Twitch channel and Discord, both of which are linked in the description down below. Lastly, if you want to support my channel, please consider checking out my Nexus at nexus.gg/AndrewChicken. There you can buy crystals, the season pass, and more, and support me in the process. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.